Welcome back. Let's now very clearly learn what HTML actually is and what we can do with it. So basically HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and remember how we learned earlier that HTML is one of the core web technologies along with CSS and JavaScript, right? Now HTML is a markup language that we web developers can use to structure and describe the entire content of any web page. So notice how I said markup language because HTML is really not a programming language. It's a markup language because we use it to describe something, and in the case of HTML we do describe content using elements. So we have different elements that we can use to describe different types of content. So for example, we have three element that we already used in the lesson, our very first web page. And so we use the ampersand p element there to create a paragraph. But we really have all kind of different elements. So elements to create links, to create page headings, images we use, and a lot more. As we learn throughout this section and basically throughout the entire course. Then, as we also learned in the lecture, where we built our very first web page, web browsers such as Google Chrome, to essentially understand HTML code and can render it as a final website. So a website that we can see in the browser. Okay, so this is essentially what HTML is and what we can do with it. But now let's just zoom in a little bit and take a look at the anatomy of an HTML element. So basically take a look at the building blocks of each HTML element. And again we are looking at the paragraph element here. As you can see by the letter P and also all this here is actually the element itself. Now an HTML element is usually made up of three parts. First is the opening tag, which is the name of the element. So in this case it's P wrapped in the less than and greater than symbols. Probably they have some other names, but that's how I like to call the symbols. So it's less than and then greater than. Then after that we have basically the content of the element. So in this example this is just text, but there might be other types of content. For example, an HTML can contain in itself another element which we then called a child element. Also some elements such as images have actually no content at all and have only an opening tag. And all of this will of course become very intuitive as we start writing HTML. This is just so that you know what I'm talking about. When I speak of opening tag or closing or content, and speaking of the closing tag, it is basically the same as the opening tag but with a slash. So we open this paragraph element simply with a P and we then close it with by adding a slash. Okay. Now for example, that do not have content such as image element that I mentioned before, we actually omit the closing tag. So in that case, we only have the opening tag and that's it. And we will see that in action, of course, once we start integrating images into a web page. Okay, and that's really all you need in order to start learning HTML and practice, which is exactly what we will do in the next lecture.